Welcome, Rob. Thank you for agreeing to be here.
Thanks. I was a little nervous tonight because I know you've had guests like George Mitchell here, and we're not going to be talking about things like world peace tonight. We're just talking about beer.
Well, maybe after we have some beer, we can get to the bottom of world peace.
But I do feel more comfortable because I feel like I know half the people in the audience, and everyone out there is drinking beer, so we're all relaxed, and we'll be more relaxed probably as the night goes on.
This is a safe place indeed.
Yeah.
So I think, a good place to start, as with any story, is right at the beginning here. I mean, can you just talk a little bit about how you got involved in the craft beer industry and most interestingly, what your first job was in a brewery?
Yeah, so I kind of stumbled into the beer business. I went to school in Vermont and studied geology. I loved geology. I loved the sciences. And after college, I felt like I needed to blow off some steam. I was fortunate enough to not have any college debt. And I went out to Colorado and got a job working construction for a year. Did that in Boulder, Colorado, and then moved to the mountains and actually worked in restaurants at night and skied during the day. And after 2 years of that, I felt like I needed to get back to New England and apply myself and possibly put my college degree to work, which my parents were very happy when I told them I was going to finally put my college degree to work that they had funded. So I moved back to Middlebury, Vermont. I had a couple friends there, and I loved Vermont. And my plan was to start getting applications for grad school and go back for an advanced degree in geology and possibly teach geology. And I got back to Vermont. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was June 30th of '93. I got there at about 4 p.m., moved a couple bags into the room I was renting, and called a buddy of mine at about 5 p.m. and said, Ian, he was one of the few people I knew in town. I said, I need a job while I apply to grad school. I'll do anything. I've worked in restaurants. I've done a ton of construction jobs in summers. I'm willing to do anything. Do you know of anything available in the community? And he said, well, I'm actually working at a local brewery in town, and I didn't even really know these breweries existed in communities back then. I figured beer was just made in big plants, maybe 10 or 15 big plants scattered around the country, which was kind of the case back then. But I didn't know about this growing craft beer scene. But he said, actually, my boss today just mentioned that we needed a part-time keg washer. So I've always liked beer, maybe not, I didn't drink good beer in college and after.
It was hard to find.
Yeah, it was hard to find, and it was more expensive. But he said, his boss said they needed a part-time keg washer, and I thought, I can get paid to wash kegs and then leave at the end of the day with free beer. This sounds like a good deal. So I showed up the next morning, July 1st of '94, and applied, which was basically, are you willing to put boots and gloves on and be soaking wet and hot and miserable all day washing kegs? And I said yes, and so by 9 a.m. I had some borrowed boots and gloves and washed kegs for that first day, washed kegs during the second day. And by the second day on the job, I was completely in love with everything I saw. And I don't know if many of you have been to craft breweries. If you haven't, you should visit them. There are a ton in this community, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But just after spending 2 days in the brewery, I saw that it encompassed almost everything that I didn't think one career could encompass. And that was the sciences. There's clearly a lot of science involved with making beer. There's biology. There's physics of boiling liquid and moving liquid from tank to tank. There's an artistic component of formulating recipes. And then there's the mechanics. I've always liked to work with my hands in construction and welding and electrical, and that's all over the place in breweries. So I just fell in love with it. And so after 2 days on the job, I called my parents and got them both on the phone, and they were very excited that I'd finally applied myself, had a track, and I was going to go to grad school for geology, use my degree. And I said, Mom and Dad, there's been a little bit of a change in plans. I'm not going to go to grad school for geology. I'm going to make beer for a living.
And thank you for that.
That was basically their response. There was this long pause, and my mom finally said, Rob, one of these days you're going to have to stop living in a fantasy land. But luckily they were, over the long haul supportive, and we wouldn't be where we are without them for sure. But they weren't crazy about the idea initially.
And it didn't take you long from being a keg washer to realize that you wanted to make beer your career, so to speak. And I mean, how did you develop the expertise and the knowledge you launched your brewery, what, a year later? I mean, how did you do it that quickly?
Well, really the answer is I didn't have the expertise even after that year. So one of the, I'll kind of backpedal to that second day. I mean, I think the third day I went in and told my boss, Lawrence Miller, who was running Otter Creek, which was the brewery I was at. I said to Lawrence, I'll spend a year here, and I'd appreciate any opportunity you can give me to learn everything about this brewery. I'll work my butt off, for minimum wage. And he was very supportive of that. And at the time, the industry was growing like crazy. Through the early 80s, all the way through 95, which is when we started selling beer, the industry was just on fire. It was a very small sliver in terms of the overall segment craft beer. When I was at Otter Creek, under 1% of the beer sold in the country was craft beer. But it was growing like crazy. So Otter Creek was growing like crazy. And when I started, there were 3 employees. When I left a year later, there were 8 employees. So just kind of by default, I was able to do everything. I washed kegs for the first month. For the second month, I washed kegs and worked on the bottling line. The third month, I started kind of apprenticing in the brew house. And by then, the owner and the more senior guy ahead of me were in the office full time. And towards the last 4 months of working there, I was brewing or at least 2 or 3 batches a day on that brew house 4 days a week. So I was able to get a little bit of experience with everything, and I was fortunate that I had a boss who was supportive in what I wanted to do. And when I was finally ready to leave after that exactly 1 year, he was supportive of me starting a brewery. And I didn't feel right about starting a brewery in Vermont, even though I loved Vermont, starting basically in his backyard because he had taught me the trade. Mm-hmm. So I came over to Maine, and he actually even came over and helped me brew my first batch of beer. So
how did you come to settle on Portland, Maine?
Well, initially, and I'd gone to school in Vermont, and that's where I moved back after Colorado. I loved Vermont. But I had also spent some time in Maine during college. I had very close college buddies that were from this area that grew up in Cumberland and Portland. And I visited them a few times in the summers, and I loved everything about it. I loved the fact that it was right on the coast. It was in the summer, so I didn't ski, but I had skied in Maine before, and I saw that. There was obviously a lot of access to outdoors. And this was a little over 20 years ago, 25 or so years ago, but Portland was just starting to kind of develop. So that appealed to me. And I basically, the big driver was I wanted to live here. I saw it as a great opportunity for a great quality of life. And I also saw it as an opportunity, back then, that was right at the time where people were really interested in kind of the restaurant movement that was starting, an artisanal food movement that was starting, artisanal coffees. And I thought Portland might be kind of an epicenter for that.
So you didn't take the easy route naturally. I mean, craft beer, it was a growing industry at the time, so you decided that you would make it even more difficult on yourself by focusing on a smaller niche in Belgian-style beers. Can you just, everyone probably knows what a Belgian-style beer is, but can you just tell us what makes a Belgian beer, and how you came to fall in love with that style and decide to focus on that?
Yeah, well, back in the early 90s, there were a lot of great beers being brewed in the craft beer movement, but most of them tended to fall in the British tradition and the German tradition. The U.S. Pacific Northwest Pale Ale IPA tradition, And, there were great beers, and probably honestly, if I wanted to make an easier time for myself, I would have brewed a beer that fell into one of those categories. But I didn't think that it would be very fulfilling to me to spend probably what would be a year building the brewery. I kind of cobbled the brewery together with a bunch of used equipment and some new equipment, but spent a year building it. And then possibly my life running it, only to make a beer that people could already get, or to make a beer that fell into a style of beers that people could already get. I wanted to give people a unique experience with beer. And I looked at the Belgian beer culture and tradition as an opportunity to do that. Belgium's kind of sandwiched between Germany and France. So Germany on one culture, or on one border, obviously very steeped in beer tradition and very strict with their beer rules, just malt, water, yeast, and hops in their beer. So they have Germany on one border, they have France on the other border, which is obviously wine country, and Belgium seems to pick influences up from both of those culture. So we almost look in some ways at making Belgian-style beers as making beers with wine yeasts. There's just this huge wine influence. The Belgians use fruits in their beers, which probably comes from wine culture. They use raspberries and cherries and peaches in their beers. They use spices in their beers. They use wild yeast, bacteria, oak barrel aging techniques, sugars in their beers. So the Belgian beer tradition, I looked at it almost as an unlimited opportunity for innovation at the brewery and an unlimited opportunity to give people unique experiences with beers. Of course, the downside of that is these beers, especially back in the mid-90s, were so unique that people just had never seen beers like that. They didn't know beers tasted like that or looked like that. And our flagship beer was the Allagash White. And you asked, how did you pick up enough knowledge over a year to start a brewery? Well, I didn't really. So I really felt it was important to keep things extremely simple when I started. So I started just with one beer, the Allagash White. Yeah. I like the support from the audience. Yeah. The beer's already kicking in, right?
Yeah. Is that a curio?
So I started just with one beer, draft only, local Portland market only. I kept things very simple because I wanted to try to limit the things that I can screw up, that I could screw up, because I'm really good at screwing stuff up. So I tried to limit those things and keep it simple. And it's funny now, we think of white beer, I don't want to use the word ubiquitous, but it's pretty common. And you can get it on tap kind of everywhere. But if you transport yourself back 20 years, people just hadn't seen beers like that that were cloudy. I mean, people hadn't seen beers like that for 70, 80, 90 years. And so I used to walk into accounts, and I'd be all excited about this beer and pour a sample for them. And this isn't the white beer here. It's a little cloudy, but I'd pour a sample for them, and the first thing they'd say is, "What's wrong with it? Why does it look like this?" And it's funny, my good friend David Geary, who's, of course, a huge pioneer nationally, and happens to be here in Portland, Maine. He started the first microbrewery east of the Mississippi back in, I think it was '87. But he used to just give me a hard time and look at it and say, I can fix that. It was a little, well, it was pretty discouraging for the first few years to get those kind of reactions. What's wrong with it? Why does it taste like this? Why does it look like this? So, we succeeded in giving people a unique experience with beer, but the downside was we couldn't sell it, which was a little bit problematic.
But how long did it take you to finally get to a point where you were educating people to the point where they knew that is how the beer was supposed to look, how it's supposed to take, and convince people that they should free up a tap line and give you a shot? I mean, there's only so many tap lines out there.
It took 10 years. It was a long, slow grind. And we really weren't growing in, I never actually, my dad traveled a lot when I was a kid, and I always said, I'm never going to travel a lot. I'm just going to do something in a local area, not have to be on the road much. But we couldn't sell the beer. It just didn't sell in this market. And the only way I kept lines locally, and even in cities as we grew, because we didn't have too many draft lines in each city, I would just go in the accounts all the time, get to know the bartenders, get to know the servers. And I think people in Portland felt sorry for me. I mean, Naomi's here, right? Yeah, so Naomi was the manager at Rira. She's now our national sales manager. And we were generally the worst selling line in most accounts. And all the other distributors and brewers knew it. And when they went in to target those lines, how's the Allagash doing? And they knew the answer would be, it's doing horribly. But they'd say, it's doing horribly, but the guy, the owner, Rob, he's always in here drinking, so I'm not going to take it off. So,
drinking Allagash wine.
Yeah. But, so even in the local market, we were able to maintain these kind of few key accounts, but it wasn't growing. And in order to survive, we just opened up as many markets as we could. And we ended up in 30 states after 10 years with 50 wholesalers. And we really got to the point where we were, to use an old cliche, we were a mile wide and an inch deep. We weren't doing a good job, even a good job anywhere. We weren't doing planning meetings with distributors. We weren't able to really have presence at accounts because we didn't have reps in any markets. It was just me going from market to market. There's no way to monitor freshness or how the distributors were storing the beer. So we weren't doing planning meetings, annual planning meetings. But we were growing it. But once we got out about 10 years, for a whole lot of reasons, I don't think it was any specific reason, the brand finally did get traction, and it was right when the craft beer movement got traction again, because craft beer grew like crazy from the late 80s to 95. In 95, things kind of flattened for a while, or grew very slowly till around 07, and then it really took off again. That's right around when our brand started to get traction, and we looked at that as an opportunity to maybe change this picture of being so thinly spread. And what we did is we basically started to withdraw from markets that we didn't feel like we were relevant in and focus on markets that we felt like we had relevancy and growth potential in markets we could support. So we ended up pulling out of 12 states and a good chunk of some additional states. And we went from 30 states to now we're in 17 plus DC, and we went from 50 wholesalers to 25 wholesalers. So we're much deeper in all the markets we do business in.
Was that a difficult decision to make, to scale back?
Not really, just because I felt like we were doing everyone a disservice being that thinly spread. It was some tough conversations with distributors. We basically did a ranker of our distributors from the highest volume distributor to the lowest, and literally drew a line across and decided to pull out of half of those distributors that fell below the line, and maybe made one or two exceptions to that. I think we stayed in San Francisco because we felt like that's just such an important metropolitan area with so much food and wine and beer culture that we really needed to be in that market. And I'm glad we did stay there. But we had to have some hard discussions with distributors. And this is such a friendly business. I mean, some of my best friends are retail accounts and distributors and customers that I've met over the years. There were some tough discussions, but we tried to give them heads up. We tried to give them time to plan and work our brand out of their book. But honestly, half of them probably did care, and they were tough discussions. Half of them kind of said, you're probably making life easier for us because your beer isn't selling.
So when we walked through, we met like a month ago, and you walked me through the brewery, and you took me into a room, and there were just all of these huge oak barrels, and it smelled like bourbon in there. Can you just talk a little bit about like how you guys utilize those old bourbon barrels and also use old wine barrels and why you do that?
Yeah. So innovation's a huge part of our culture at the brewery, and remind me to mention our program with employees with innovation, because I end up getting sidetracked when you ask me questions. But the room you're referring to is where we make the Curio, and we use Jim Beam bourbon barrels to make that beer, and it's our triple that we age in Jim Beam bourbon barrels for 2 months. And it's funny because we completely stumbled on that beer. I had been talking for months and months and months, this is a dozen or so years ago, about wanting to do beer in oak, because a couple breweries in the country were doing it. It was very common in Belgium to do it. And finally, the guys at the brewery are like, just order some oak barrels. You've been talking about this for months. And I had just gone to this seminar on bourbon barrels at the craft beer conference, and I'd gotten a contact at Jim Beam. So I ordered 2 Jim Beam barrels. And they just sat there for a couple months. We didn't have specific plans for them yet. And then one day we were planning a bottling run for our triple, which it's one of the beers we've been doing for years. And at the time we just packaged it in a cork finished bottle, and we got these bottles from Europe. But basically we had I think about 200 or 300 gallons of beer, but only enough bottles to package about half of the beer, because these bottles we get from Europe had been delayed in customs, and there was no way we were going to get them out of customs. So we don't like to waste beer, so we basically were stuck with 100, 150 gallons of beer after we filled all the bottles, and we kind of shrugged and decided to fill these 2 Jim Beam barrels with the beer. It was on a Wednesday. And we honestly thought the triple would be a terrible fit in the bourbon barrels. We had always had this perception that it had to be a dark beer in bourbon barrels, and I think that's commonly what most people are used to. And so we filled these oak barrels right to the top. I bunged them with wooden bungs because I didn't know any better. And we put them in a side room, and apparently you're supposed to let, and this is kind of common sense, but you're supposed to let these barrels breathe because beer is carbonated. Basically the pressure started building up in these barrels, and I came in on a Saturday because I used to be in the brewery 7 days a week, and I came in on a Saturday just to sample the tanks of beer, the fermentations, and I walked by the barrels, and the heads of the barrels were bulging, and there was beer squirting out between the staves of the barrels. So I kind of panicked. I didn't want them to explode, and grabbed a hammer and a screwdriver and just got down and tapped the wooden bung on one of the barrels. And I just tapped it once, and the bung like flew up, soaked me with beer, covered my glasses with beer. And I took my glasses off, and there was foam coming out of the bung in the barrel. And everyone's reaction when you open a champagne bottle and it foams, you try to drink it and you can't. It goes flying out. But my reaction, because we don't want to waste beer, is I got down on my knees. I started slurping the foam, which was completely, I got about 2 ounces of the gallons that came out of it. But I was like, wow, this is delicious. So I immediately fell in love with the flavor. In just 4 days between Wednesday and Saturday, the barrel had completely transformed the beer. It picked up all these cool coconut notes and vanilla notes and even bourbon notes. So I immediately called Jason, our brewmaster. I was like, man, we got to order a bunch of these barrels. So anyway, and it's funny too, because I know so many people in the audience. I ran into Chuck Healy, who did our insurance years ago. I'm terrible with coming up with names at the brewery. I wasn't the one that came up with the name Allagash. I don't come up with the cool names like Curio and Interlude and Confluence. It's all the other creative people at the brewery. I've come up with all the names like White and Double and Triple, the boring, all the boring names. Chuck Healy's son, Brian, was working at the brewery as a summer intern, and we were trying to come up with names for the beer, and Chuck's son Brian was the one that came up with the name for the beer. And it's one of our best, I think it's our second best-selling beer now.
Well, hopefully he gets a royalty for that. So.
He can have free beer whenever he wants. Yeah. Send him by the brewery.
So I mean, you've talked a little bit about how sometimes mistakes can lead to innovation. I mean, we've just talked about that. So, what are some of the deliberate ways that you try to foster innovation in a brewery?
One of the things that I love about our culture, and we have a number of core values which we take very seriously, and we really, all companies have these core values. You just Google a name of a company and it's got core values. I would say that 95% of the companies out there aren't living their core values. We may not always be true to them all the time, but we always try to, and innovation is one of them. And one of the ways I think, or one of the reasons we've been so successful with innovation is we involve everyone at the company. We have over 110 employees now, and we have a program at the company where anyone at the brewery, regardless of the department you're in, whether you work in our guest relations, retail part of the company, or you're in accounting, or on the bottling line, in production and sales, if you have an idea for innovative beer, you can talk to Jason, our brewmaster, and brew it on a little 10-gallon system. And a lot of those beers have become full-size commercial batches of beer. It was funny, and this is, one of the cool things about the craft beer industry in general, and this is nationwide because there are 4,800 brewers now in the country, is just the community impact they've had. And we have, this is just kind of fun, and it struck me as being pretty cool. Through that innovation program last year, we had someone in our retail store, Rachel, came up with an idea for a beer. We loved the concept, and we ended up brewing it this year for our Fluxus. And our Fluxus is a different beer every year. We've been doing it for almost 10 years. And we actually raise money through the sale of Fluxus to support a pediatric nurse scholarship fund at Maine Med. So she came up with this concept for a beer last year. We ended up using that recipe for our Fluxus this year, and we sold the Fluxus and then awarded the nurse scholarship fund to 10 nurses, and her brother was actually one of the recipients, who's a nurse at Maine Medical Center. So it was just a kind of cool relationship in the community that, she came up with the recipe, her brother was a recipient, and everyone at the brewery, we were a big believer in supporting the community. The community's done a tremendous amount to support us. And everyone at the brewery, it's through their hard work that our philanthropy program is possible. But that was just a really cool kind of example of how just craft breweries in general, not just Allagash, are making such a big difference in communities.
And in Portland, there's been an explosion of craft breweries, and I'm just wondering how, if at all, that's kind of changed your calculus on how you're operating your brewery. Obviously, it looks like a lot of Portland breweries are putting more emphasis into their own tap rooms, selling more of the beer right over there, selling full pours and things like that. And they're more of the really hop in your face kind of beer, while you guys are still sticking to your niche and you have more of a traditional tasting room model. Is the industry the way that it's changing around you, changing the way that you guys are approaching how you guys are doing business? And if so, how?
Well, you're right. The industry is changing. It's been unbelievable, the amount of change, because I mentioned earlier that from when we started in 95 to 2007, I don't know if I'd characterize it as a stagnant period, but there sure wasn't a whole lot of excitement behind it. And between 2007 and now, there's been a tremendous amount of excitement, and that's just been amped up at an unbelievable level the last 2 or so years. It's hard to keep track of how many breweries have opened. It's hard to keep track of the number. I just did a talk 2 weeks ago and had outdated information. There are people there from Bureau of Liquor Enforcement, and I put a statistic up on the board, I think, of 86 brewers, and they corrected me and said, well, there's even more now. Literally, it almost seems like a couple a month are opening up. There are probably going to be well over 100 brewers in this state. I would say almost in a few months, definitely within 6 or 8 months. So the landscape has changed tremendously. This model where customers come to your brewery and buy beer, it didn't exist when I started. No one visited us back in the 90s. And it was funny because I was kind of proud of, when we got the brewery open. And it was a pretty humble Spartan brewery, but, I was pretty proud of it because I built a lot of it. And I put a sign next to our door that said, tours and tastings, 3 p.m., and my parents came and visited me a month or so after I put the sign up, and they looked at the sign and they shook their head and they said, no one is going to come out to this industrial park and visit you.
It was literally a shingle.
They were 100% right. No one came out for years. And no one came to these industrial parks for years unless you were buying like gaskets or nuts and bolts or, like a container of sanitizing solution. People didn't go to these little industrial parks on the outskirts of these towns. But now that these breweries are opening up in this model where breweries can do sometimes 70, 80, 90% of their business right across the bar table, people are pouring into these little industrial parks. And I just went back and visited Otter Creek a month or so ago, and I went to what used to be a sleepy little industrial park road, and there are tons of people there visiting 2 breweries and a cider maker and a distillery. And the same thing out where we are, out on Riverside Street. There are now 3 other breweries right next to us, a 4th opening up, a distillery around the corner, Geary's is right around the corner, and it's gone from no one coming out to visit us. I mean, maybe 15 people a week would come through Allagash 10 years ago. This year we'll get 100,000 people through the brewery. And if you go there on a Friday afternoon or a Saturday, there's cars lined up on both sides of the street. And it's honestly creating zoning issues in communities all over the country. I mean, who would go spend 4 hours with their family on a weekend in an industrial park 10 years ago? And now people are doing that.
But you can get shawarma and everything else out there.
That's right, and there's food trucks out there, and I mean, you gotta provide some food because people are going from brewery to brewery sampling the beers. But to answer your question about how it's changed us, it really hasn't changed us at all. And I think, honestly, we're one of the few breweries who doesn't charge for samples at the brewery. You can't. And
Cheers.
We aim to keep it like that. So we do 4 free 2-ounce samples. You can't buy, you can't sit at our bar or our, sampling room. It's not really a bar, and buy, 2 or 3 pints. We'd rather be able to sit someone down, talk about the brewery a little bit, give them a selection of beers that we think represent some of our innovation and some of our history, and then hopefully turn that seat over and give someone else that experience. So we don't anticipate changing that model. But, the one thing it's done for us is, we really can't complain about all these breweries opening up because we're growing faster than we've ever grown. Even in the local community. We're having our best year ever in Maine. We feel like we're accelerating more than we ever have on an innovation front. We've got great support in the community. And all these breweries that are opening up around Allagash are bringing more people out to the park that we're in. And it's just making it a more vibrant and rich experience for people that come out there. And we love it when people come out and we can say, hey, go check out Foundation next. Go check out Geary's around the corner. They're one of the pioneers in the industry. Go check out our friends at Austin Street. So it's fun.
So one thing, we're having the 16 counties here, and it's really cool about this beer is that you try to use as much, Maine-made ingredients that you could. And I'm just wondering, what do you see the future of agriculture in Maine to be able to supply the ingredients to make beer here? Because I was told once that, Maine was once a great producer of hops, for instance, but now it's really hard to get them. Do you see this as being a big potential to have a completely local?
I do, and I mean, for this beer, for 16 counties, we're very, very excited about this beer. This is all Maine sourced for our cereal grains. So all the oats come from Maine, all the wheat comes from Maine, and all the barley is grown in Maine and malted in Maine. There was no one doing anything like that for the beer industry just 5 years ago. So we're excited about it. We're paying about 2.5 times more for all those raw materials than we are for the ingredients that we can source elsewhere in the country, where they obviously have massive economies of scale. But we're a huge believer in supporting getting this movement going in Maine. I mean, I think there's just a lot to be said about local agriculture. And this year we'll buy about 175,000 pounds of grain for the 16 counties. Next year, Jason, our brewmaster, was saying he plans on buying around 250,000 pounds of local grains. And we look at, honestly, our national footprint of 17 states plus DC, and we actually do 90% of our business outside of Maine. We look at being able to leverage our national footprint to make more of this beer, which supports more local agriculture. So hopefully we'll just sell more and more of this beer.
All right, I think we have to stop it there for some Q&A. We could keep going, I guess, but yes. Yeah, so we do have someone wandering around with a microphone. So does anyone out there have any questions that they want to pose to Rob?
Hello, Rob.
Hey, Chuck.
He's a plant.
I do actually have 2 questions for you, Rob. During that first 10 years, when things sounded like they were pretty tough, and I remember those 10 years along with, probably not as vividly as you do, but I remember them. Was there ever a time when you thought that you might throw in the towel?
Yeah, there was, but they've been very brief. I'm really bullheaded. I'll just keep grinding away at someone till basically someone tells me, till someone makes me stop. But we definitely got close. I mean, right up before the craft beer industry really started to get more traction between 05 and 07, and right before right as our brand and before our brand started to get some traction, there were a few things we ended up really struggling with, and there were a couple days where I was like, you know what, maybe this isn't going to work out. But honestly, it was just probably 2 or 3 times over the 20-year stretch, and 2 or 3 times over that first 12 or so year stretch where I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. But not too many times. Like I said, I'm pretty bullheaded, probably to a fault, with just grinding away at stuff. So.
Well, I think most of us are happy that you didn't give in to those few minutes of doubt there. My other question, Rob, is out of all the beers that you brew, which are all fantastic, I love them all, it's just a matter of degree, which one is your favorite? And I don't want you to cop out on me, just which one is your favorite?
I used to, 5 years ago, I would have answered that question like, I can't have a favorite. It's like choosing a favorite between your kids. But I do have a favorite. It's the white. I love the white. And it's funny because the one thing I was worried about, and there should have been a million other things that I should have been worried about when I started. I had maybe too much confidence than I should have. But the one thing I was worried about is that I wouldn't like the beer that we started with. And I knew I was just going to start with one beer to keep it simple. But the one thing I was worried about was that I wouldn't like it. And because I knew that if I didn't like it, I wouldn't be able to sell it. I just wouldn't feel comfortable selling it. But luckily, I fell in love with it early on. And really, I tweaked the recipe a little bit between probably July of 95 and November of 95. And since then, it hasn't been tweaked at all. And so over 20 years. But You know, but I loved it back then. I love it even more now. It's almost really all I drink. I drink it whenever I go out to accounts in town, and that's what I drink when I have a couple beers at home after work. So I love the white. It's my favorite, and that's I think what everyone at the brewery will tell you too. I mean, Matthew, like in the store, in the GR store, when I come in on the weekend, it's like I want the white.
Thanks, Robin. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Really, good luck.
Anyone else? Oh, we got one over here.
Rob, two comments and a question. First, the 16 counties is spectacular. Secondly, as somebody who grew up in Portland, I can't tell you how proud I am when you go to D.C., Chicago, San Francisco, San Diego. Allagash is on the menu with all these world-class brews. It's quite a credit. Where do you see Allagash in 10 years?
That's a good question. And we actually just did an off-site where we started to wrestle with some of those things. Because honestly, for the first 10 years, we were just in kind of survival mode. We were worried about making payroll and paying our malt company. And then we went into this period where we were just kind of scrambling to keep up for a number of years. And now we're trying to kind of get our arms around it. And honestly, kind of where we're falling is we want to continue to succeed with our core values. 10 years from now, I want to feel like we're still innovative and we're contributing more to the community and that we feel more like a family even than we do today. We have 110 employees now, and it's hard to feel like a family when 10 years ago we had 10 employees. Now we've got 110 employees, but you have to work hard at it to feel like a family when you've had that kind of growth. Hopefully, if we continue to be blessed with growth over the next 10 or so years, we'll feel even more like a family if we have, I don't know, who knows, 200 employees. Hopefully we feel like we're continuing to excel on the quality front, and the beers are more consistent, and the shelf life is better. So really my goals are to just keep hammering away at the things that are important to us, the reasons we get out of bed and go into work every day at the brewery, and hopefully we'll feel good about the place we get if we can continue to focus on those things and excel with those things. So it's not so much we want to be in this many states, or we want this market share, or we want to be doing this much volume. It's more focusing on those core values, and hopefully that gets us to a place that we are, happy about.
So I've got a question and a statement. Within the last, 6 months, I've been at 2 events, and in each of those 2 events, we had somebody say, Allagash helped us along the way. So congratulations, it's a tribute to you, and it's kind of that pay it forward. You talked about the Vermont brewer that, came down with you and helped you set up and took a look at things in Portland. So tribute to you for helping those other brewers. One was Tributary and one was Rising Tide. Nice job there.
Yeah, and they're great. Like the Todd Mott, who runs Tributary, he gave me one of my first brewery tours back in '93 when he was at Commonwealth Brewery in Boston. He's an amazing brewer, Todd. I've never tried a beer in 22 or 23 years that he's made that I haven't loved. And yeah, Rising Tide, they started right out near us. They're great people, and we got some great breweries out in the industrial park now.
Yeah, so, good for you to be helping those people out. The other question was similar to the question that Chuck asked, but not so much did you think about folding, but did you think about, in some of those lean years, going to a different style of beer besides the Belgians?
Yes. We absolutely considered that. And I can't tell you how many times I had retailers, other brewers who were watching us struggle, distributors saying, why don't you guys do something that's accessible? And it's funny now because the white is considered an accessible beer. But, you know, for years we got asked that question. And we considered it on a bunch of occasions. But you know, when we got asked that question over the first 10 or so years, we didn't have our core values kind of written down in black and white like we do now, but we knew what they were. And we felt like that would just be a break with our core values. We felt like one of the reasons we started was to give people unique experiences with beer, and to do something that was more accessible, just to do more volume would break with that, and we'd lose something that was important to us. So, I mean, obviously now I'm glad that we didn't, but there was a couple times where we sure had that discussion.
There are so many great American cities that are so much bigger than Portland that don't have a brewing scene even close to what we have. Do you have a theory as to why Portland has such a dynamic, innovative, just fantastic beer scene?
I think it just has to do with the Portland culture as a whole. I think it's got this amazingly vibrant restaurant scene. It's got this amazing coffee scene. We're doing this really cool beer actually with our curio called James Bean, where we are steeping a local wood-roasted coffee. It's Speckled Axe, right, with that we use for that beer? So it's got this like vibrant coffee scene. I just think these crafts in general are such a huge part of the Portland culture, and I think it's what a lot of people, we have a huge tourist industry, and now the tourist industry has gone from really just being a summer industry to almost being year-round. I mean, we'll get visitors year-round that are coming up into Portland, not just to see breweries, but to visit the Portland restaurants and to taste the coffee and to visit the breweries and to see the distilleries. So I think it's just part of the Portland culture. People are coming here for it, and I think people are moving here to be a part of it. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but you know, it was something that I kind of hoped would happen when I started the brewery here, and you know, luckily it has, and I don't see it letting up anytime soon. I think the momentum's just going to continue to grow.
Hello, I have two-part question. One, because you are an entrepreneur, you're sort of a mad scientist, you're an artist, you're a sales guy, you're a marketing guy, you've worn so many hats with your company. I was just wondering, like, if you think back on it all, like, what are some of the highest highs and the most exciting moments, whether they're in, like, on top of a keg or at a sales meeting or something? And then to that point also, you are an entrepreneur and a mad scientist, and you do all these things. And you're in the beer industry, so how do you keep yourself grounded and sane, and you're very present in this conversation and on a hub furniture chair? So, like, your highest highs, and then like also like the balance. Like, what are some of your highest highs? But then also, just how do you keep yourself sort of like chill?
You know, I don't really even think I'm in a position to feel like I ever shouldn't be grounded. I don't know. I think it was like 10 or 12 years of, you know, the bulk of our life at the brewery has been just like struggles and headwinds, and it's just kind of what I know. And even as times got, you know, as there was more slack in the past 7 or 8 years, which there definitely has been for us, I think those first 12 years just taught us you always need to have discipline. You always need to appreciate every single line. It's a completely different world now in the beer business. A lot of craft breweries open now, and they're the belle of the ball overnight. They'll start and they'll have people beating a path to their door, and everyone wants to put them on tap, and that's just not the life that we, you know or grew up in the beer business. And we've just always appreciated every placement. We've appreciated everything our wholesaler does for us, our retailer does for us. I appreciate it every time someone buys our beer, and I don't know. I'm almost scared to not be grounded. And then what was the in terms of over the years, my job has changed a lot because when I started alone, and for one of the things that really excited me about starting the brewery was just building it. I love working with my hands. I worked a lot of construction jobs when I was in high school and college and after college. So it was a grind building the brewery, but it was kind of fun because I got to spend a year just welding and plumbing and doing some electrical stuff and carpentry. So I loved that, but then I had to kind of put that behind. And then I loved brewing the beer and working on the bottling line, and then I had to kind of put that behind. And that's just kind of been my life at the brewery, and I've enjoyed all of it, but I don't necessarily miss any of it or yearn for the way things used to be. I'm loving the way things are now. We've got an amazing team at the brewery. I wake up in the morning, I always say, I can't wait to get into work because I can't wait to spend time with the 110 employees at the brewery who are just so passionate about what they do. I come in, I just get excited talking to people. Maybe it's because I'm fidgety, but I don't spend much time on my desk. You guys know, you see me, I spend a little time at a desk, but then I'll just walk around and talk to people at the brewery because they inspire me. They make me more energized and passionate. So that's what I'm really enjoying now, is just working with this amazing team of people at the brewery. So, who knows what's next?
So you talk about how you started out small with 10 people and you've grown to 110. How do you continue to have that family feel?
You have to work really hard with it, and you have to work, harder and harder as you get bigger. So it's just, family is one of our core values. It's written there because it's something we have to constantly remind ourselves of. We put a lot of emphasis on HR. I think Celine's here, right? I saw Celine earlier. So the head of our HR department. No, she's back. I can't see anyone. I recognize some voices, but we put a lot of emphasis on HR. There's no one department that's more important than another, because if one department isn't working, it's a problem collectively for everyone. But at the end of the day, it's people that make things happen at the brewery. It's not the machines, it's not necessarily the beer, it's the people that make it all happen. So we just put a ton of emphasis on human resources and just making sure we're robust in that department. We have 4 full-time people now in just focusing on HR out of 110 people. So it's a strong department. That's basically in a nutshell. It's just, we recognize it's a ton of work. The work changes with each passing year as we change, but we have to work to be a family. We do a ton of cool stuff. We did this annual dinner, which I think we're doing again this year, called Friendsgiving, where we just kind of did it for fun. We had a dinner kind of in the middle of the brew house. All the employees in the Portland area, came in, and we got a caterer, came in and had a kind of a Thanksgiving dinner with employees and just kind of enjoyed everyone's company. At our annual holiday party, it's cool. One of the things that always strikes me about that is you'll see these groups of people, but people aren't grouped by department. You'll see one group of 10 people, and there'll be 2 people from guest relations, someone from sales, someone from the maintenance department, someone from production, someone from accounting. So everyone spends time together as a family, and we try to provide opportunities for people to spend time together as a family. We do a ton of events like that. We do pig roasts at the brewery. Different departments every month or so will do different events, like the warehouse crew, the Warren Ave crew that does our logistics and supply and warehousing. they did a bratwurst cookout. The mechanical department did a pig roast. So we just look for as many opportunities as possible to spend time together like a family spends time together.
Hi. First off, I can't even express how proud I am to see Allagash as I travel. Chicago, LA, Austin, all over the place. Everywhere I go, I see Allagash White on tap and other Allagash brands as well. And it makes me really proud to see that. But I'm curious, as a longtime Allagash fan, Curio was my favorite for probably my favorite beer in the world for about 5 years. Recently, that's changed to one of your competitors locally in the general vicinity of your establishment. I'm curious how you feel about that with all the local competition. It seems like Maine is kind of in a golden age of brewing. How do you feel about that, and how do you see the industry in 5 years, 10 years from now? Do you see these other competitors as competition, or do you view them as partners? And how do you think things are going to play out in the future? Do you think it's a fad, or do you think everyone is going to prosper?
There are a lot of questions there.
And they're all good.
Yeah, and they are all good. And this is just my opinion, of course. This is not a fad. I mean, this industry and segment is here to stay. There are a lot of interesting, and I'll say the interesting segment of flavorful beers and community breweries is absolutely here to stay. I mean, once people like you try these beers, they're not going to go back to drinking mass-produced, multinational, flavorless, characterless beers. They're just not gonna do it. I mean, those beers, those mass-produced beers, they're very consistent, but it's a completely different experience than buying a pint of white, even in Chicago, especially if you've visited Allagash Brewing. When you visit Allagash, the passion the beer is made with. And the same is the case with which is the other beer that's your new favorite? Just out of curiosity. Epiphany. Yeah, it's a great beer. Yeah, we love those guys at Foundation. They're doing an amazing job. And honestly, to me, it's just important you stay in the small and independently owned brewery fold. And and the industry's changing. The big brewers are all of a sudden interested. Now that us craft brewers have carved out this 12% market share, and they've seen these kind of commoditized beers lose share over the last 8 or so years, they're starting to get interested, and they're buying up these community, small and independently owned breweries. And it could change the fabric of the industry. How that's going to change it, I don't know, but I would guess that their focus on, small and independent community doesn't align with our, view and focus of small and independent in community. But what do we think of all these breweries? I think it's great. I personally love competition. I don't mind competition at all. I mean, if you're in business, you better be willing to compete. I mean, some businesses might be easy for a while. This business, honestly, there was a ton of slack in this business from around 05 or 07 to around now, or a couple months ago. There's indications of headwind in this industry. But there was a ton of slack, but we've spent the last 7 or 8 years just trying to build as much discipline and rigor into how we do business as possible. Making sure we bring retail accounts into the brewery, invest in bringing retail accounts, from our community and from other communities into the brewery as often as possible, and spending a ton of time with them, showing them what we do, bringing distributors in the brewery, investing in innovation, beefing up our sales force to make sure we are supporting our distributors better than anyone else. So I mean, the competition doesn't bother me. It's made us better. We've seen all this competition coming down the pike for quite a while. It doesn't surprise me that all these breweries have opened, and it's really pushed us to do a better job on all fronts, and I welcome it. I love it. And again, we can't really find a lot to complain about because we're having our best year ever, even locally, despite all these breweries opening. And I think a lot of that is just because all these breweries opening is just bringing more people into this small and independent brewery-owned fold.
Great. Folks, I think we're going to have to wind it up. We're pretty much out of time. Randy and Rob, thank you both very much on behalf of the paper. Thank you, everybody, for coming. However,
Let's go.